Hi everyone, today we're looking at Module 2, Lesson 7 and 8, and this is going to focus on sequencing translations. So we want to think about the idea of whether or not it's possible to perform more than one translation on an object. And I'm going to say yes, that is possible. If I have an object and I translate it in one direction and then I set up a second translation in another direction, I should be able to move that object more than once without affecting it. So let's look at some new notation for our new ideas. We've talked about a point P, and when P is transformed by the function f, that's equal to f of p or p prime. And we've used this notation a lot lately, so this should sound really familiar. But let's say we had p prime and we wanted to transform it a second time by the function g. I'm just using g because it's different from f. So the function g of p prime or p double prime. So I'm looking at 1 prime for one translation, 2 primes for two translations. So if I had 4 translations, I'd probably end up with 4 primes. So if I take a look at my figure here, which is a square, and I transform it along the vector for my first function, I end up with that first iteration of my transformation, which would be p prime. And then I have a second vector, and I transform my square along that vector g to get my final transformation, which is p double prime, right? So whenever I have more than one step for my transformation, I want to notate it just like that. And like I said, there can be many transformations done to the same object. And when that happens, we call it a sequence. Now, just as a reminder, we saw some of these kinds of transformation sequences when we played the Shape Mod game to prepare for our quiz. A lot of times you had to use more than one step to get from the original shape to the transformation or that shape prime, and we used several steps to do that. So we were pretty familiar with the fact that we can perform a sequence. And sequences are important in transformations because it allows us to undo something that we've already done. We can move a shape from one direction to another and then return it back to its original location. So that's really helpful mathematically, and we'll talk about that a little more over the course of this week. Now we're going to move into Module 2, Lesson 8, and this is really about sequencing reflections. So the first half of this video just had to do with translations, which are our slide actions. But now we're going to look at reflections and whether or not we can combine or sequence translations and reflections. So if we can combine or sequence translations, then why not reflections? Let's look at a rule. One of the rules that we really want to pay attention to is that order does matter when we are sequencing reflections. And I'm going to show you how that works and why that works. So let's say I have a little shape, which is a star, and then I have 2 lines of reflection, L and M. First thing I'm going to do is reflect over L, then M. And we're going to see what happens. So I have my star, and I didn't have any transparency paper at home, so I'm just using some parchment paper that I had in my cabinet that's kind of see-through to work on this transformation. So I'm reflecting the star over line L, and then I'm going to take that star prime and I'm going to reflect it over line M. So I'm doing kind of this two-part transformation. So I've got my star, star prime, and star double prime. Now I'm going to reflect over the line M and then the line L, and we're going to see what happens. So I go back to my original star and my line M, and I reflect. And I'm kind of ending up in my notes here, but that's okay. That's my star prime. And then I'm going to take my star prime and reflect over line L. And when I do that, I kind of end up way up here in the top of my notes, which is a very different place than I ended up the first time I reflected. So we can see that by switching the order of the transformation, we end up changing the result significantly. On one hand, I ended up right here next to my notes with that little blue double star, that blue star double prime, and then my orange star double prime is like way up underneath my square example that I did before. Those are two very different locations. So obviously the order of my sequence really matters. I have to pay attention to what my goal is. So order will also help us to reverse transformations, especially in reflections. We want to make sure we're using the right order. And we'll talk about that more this week. So that's all for today. Don't forget to go back, pause, rewind, and play to get your best notes.